Snow blindness was a concept Galatea Mercer understood only in theory, for her world had been painted in permanent midnight since she was 5 years old. But the biting cold of the blizzard stripping the heat from her bones, that was visceral. That was real. Cast out to die by the very Alpha who swore to protect her. She was left with nothing but a thin coat and the terrifying silence of the woods. Yet over the roar of the wind, a sound cut through the darkness, not a growl of hunger, but a mournful, commanding howl that vibrated in her chest. She didn't know it belonged to the most feared predator in the Northern Hemisphere. She didn't know she was stumbling toward the Alpha King. All she knew was that the monster in the storm sounded less cruel than the humans she left behind. Galatea Mercer stood in the center of the packhouse living room, the familiar scent of old pine and stale beer suffocating her. The air was thick with tension, heavy enough to weigh down her shoulders, though she couldn't see the sneers she knew were painted on the faces surrounding her. "She's a liability, Garrick. Look at her." The voice belonged to Livia, the Alpha's daughter. Her tone was sharp like shattered glass. "Winter is barely starting and the stocks are already low. We can't afford to feed a useless mouth." Galatea tightened her grip on the hem of her worn sweater. She kept her chin high, staring unseeingly ahead. She knew exactly where Alpha Garrick was sitting. The leather of his chair creaked rhythmically as he shifted his weight. To her right, the fireplace crackled, the only source of warmth in a room that felt freezing cold. "I can work," Galatea said, her voice steady, despite the trembling in her hands. "I sort the herbs better than anyone. I can mend the nets without light. I don't eat much. Enough." Garrick's voice boomed, silencing the murmurs of the Shadow Ridge pack. "Livia is right. The council met this morning. The blizzard warnings are severe. We are cutting the dead weight." Dead weight. The words landed like a physical blow. Galatea had lost her sight in a rogue attack that killed her parents 12 years ago. Since then, she had fought tooth and nail to prove her worth, working until her fingers bled, memorizing every floorboard of the pack house so she wouldn't stumble. It hadn't been enough. "You are 18 now, Galatea." Garrick continued, his voice devoid of empathy. "If you haven't shifted by now, you're an Omega without a wolf. A blind Omega without a wolf. You are a drain on our resources." "You promised my father," she whispered, the memory of her father's last stand flashing in her mind. "You promised him you'd keep me safe. I kept you alive for 12 years. Garrick scoffed. "That debt is paid." Rough hands grabbed her arms. It was Brant Livia's mate. His grip was bruising. "Let's go, Gala. Don't make this harder than it has to be." "No, please!" Panic flared in her chest. Being exiled in summer was a death sentence. Being exiled in the dead of winter with a blizzard approaching was an execution. "Garrick, please, I'll sleep in the barn. I won't eat from the main stores. I'll forage for myself. Just don't throw me out there. The decision stands." The door was shoved open, and the howling wind invaded the house, screaming like a banshee. The temperature dropped instantly. Galatea was dragged across the threshold. She tried to dig her heels into the floorboards, but she was small, malnourished, and easily overwhelmed. "Good luck finding your way in the dark." Livia laughed cruelly from the warmth of the hallway. Brant shoved her hard. Galatea stumbled, her boots slipping on the icy porch steps. She fell, her knees cracking against the frozen earth. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind her. The sound of the lock sliding into place echoed with finality. Galatea sat there for a moment, the snow instantly soaking through her thin jeans. She waited foolishly for the door to open again. For anyone to say it was a mistake. She listened for the familiar heartbeat of old Martha the cook, who used to sneak her extra rolls, or for Toby the stable boy. Silence. Only the wind answered her. She pushed herself up, her fingers numb. The sensory map she had built of the pack, lands over a decade, was useless now. Snow muffled sound, altering the acoustics of the world. The scent of pine was buried under the metallic tang of impending ice. "Fine," she whispered into the gale, a tear freezing on her cheek before it could fall. "I'll die, but I won't die on your doorstep." She turned her back on the house that had never been a home and walked into the white void. 3 hours had passed, or maybe 3 days. Time had no meaning when the cold began to shut down the body. Galatea's feet were heavy blocks of ice. She could no longer feel her toes. The shivering that had racked her body for the first hour had stopped, which she knew from the medical texts she had had read to her was a sign of late-stage hypothermia. The pleasant lethargy was creeping in, the desire to just lie down and sleep. "Just close your eyes," a voice in her head whispered. "It won't hurt anymore." She stumbled over a hidden root, crashing face first into a snowdrift. The snow was soft, almost comforting. It would be so easy. As she lay there waiting for the end, the wind shifted. The sound was distant, low, and terrifyingly powerful. It wasn't the chaotic yipping of coyotes or the aggressive barking of the Shadow Ridge patrols. This was a melody, deep, resonant, and lonely. Galatea lifted her head. Her wolf, usually dormant and silent, stirred deep within her soul for the first time in years. It wasn't a full shift, just a flicker of awareness. A pull. Go, her instincts whispered. "It's a wolf," she muttered, her lips cracking. "It'll eat me." "Go." The howl came again. It sounded closer this time, vibrating through the ground against her cheek. There was a strange quality to it, pain. It sounded like a creature that was mourning the world, or perhaps challenging it. She forced her arms to move. Pushing herself up was the hardest thing she had ever done. She was blind, freezing, and walking toward a predator, but the alternative was freezing to death alone. If she was going to die, she wanted to know what made a sound that beautiful. She walked. She bumped into trees, scratching her face on low-hanging branches. She fell into drifts that swallowed her up to her waist. But she kept moving toward the sound. The terrain grew steeper. She was climbing. The wind here was fiercer, biting at her exposed skin. Then the smell hit her. It wasn't just the scent of a wolf. It was ozone cedarwood and something metallic like blood on snow. It was intoxicating. It smelled like safety and danger wrapped in one. Snap! A twig broke nearby. Not by the wind, by a paw. Galatea froze, clutching a tree trunk for support. Her breath hitched in her throat. She couldn't see, but she could feel the presence. It was massive. The displacement of the air told her something huge was standing just 10 feet away. The low rumble of a growl started deep in a chest that sounded like a sovereign. The vibration traveled through the frozen ground and up through the soles of her boots. I'm not armed," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. She held her hands out, palms open. "I don't have anything. I'm just tired." The growling stopped. She waited for the teeth. She waited for the tearing of flesh. Instead, she heard a soft whiff of breath. Warm, moist air blew across her face, smelling of pine and raw power. Then something wet and rough brushed against her frozen hand. A tongue. Galatea gasped, flinching back, but she was too weak to run. The creature stepped closer. She could hear the crunch of snow under immense weight. Fur, thick and coarse, brushed against her leg. It was tall. The shoulder of the beast came up to her hip. This was no ordinary wolf. This was a monster. "Are you going to kill me?" she asked into the darkness. The beast let out a soft whine. It nudged her hip with its snout, pushing her. Not attacking. Herding. She took a step in the direction it pushed. It nudged her again. "You want me to follow?" The wolf barked once, a sharp, clear sound. She grabbed a handful of the thick fur at its neck to steady herself. The heat radiating from the animal was incredible. It was like standing next to a furnace. "Okay," she whispered, tears leaking from her unseeing eyes. "Okay." They walked together, the blind girl and the monster. The wolf moved slowly, adjusting its pace to her stumbling gait. Whenever she faltered, the massive head would press against her back, keeping her upright. She didn't know how long they walked. She only knew that the scent of cedarwood was becoming her entire world. Eventually, the wind died down. The air grew still. She heard the sound of a heavy wooden door creaking open on oiled hinges. Warmth. Rushing, beautiful warmth engulfed her. The smell of a crackling fire, roasted meat, and clean linen. She collapsed. She didn't feel the floor. She felt strong arms, human arms, catch her before she hit the ground. "I've got to." A deep baritone voice rumbled against her ear. It was the same pitch as the howl. "I've got you, little one." And for the first time in 12 years, the darkness didn't feel so scary. Galatea Mercer let go and let the blackness take her. Waking up was confusing. It usually involved the biting cold of the attic room in the Shadow Ridge pack house and the screaming of Livia demanding breakfast. This time, waking up involved softness. Galatea shifted her hand, brushing against sheets that felt like silk and heavy wool. She was lying on a mattress that didn't have springs digging into her back. The air in the room was toasty, heated by a fire that popped and hissed nearby. She sat up, gasping as a sharp pain shot through her thawing limbs. "Careful," the voice from her memory said. It came from the corner of the room. "The nerve damage is healing. It's going to hurt like hell for a bit." Galatea stiffened, pulling the duvet up to her chin. "Who are you? Where am I?" She heard the chair scrape against the floor. Footsteps approached, heavy, deliberate. He walked like a predator. "You are in my cabin," the man said. "I found you in the snow. Or rather, you found me." "The wolf," she breathed. "The white wolf." She didn't know how she knew the wolf was white. The word just felt right on her tongue. "Yes." He stopped a few feet away. She could smell him clearly now. The cedarwood and ozone scent was overwhelming, mixed with the rich aroma of coffee. "I'm Kieran," he said. No surname. No title. Just Kieran. "I'm Galatea," she replied automatically. Then the fear kicked in. Are you a rogue?" A rogue was a wolf without a pack, usually violent and feral. If he was a rogue, she was in more danger here than in the snow. There was a pause. A low, dry chuckle resonated in the room. Something like that. "Drink this." He placed a warm mug in her hands. Her fingers brushed his. His skin was rough, calloused, and scorching hot. A spark like static electricity, but 10 times stronger, zapped her fingertips. She gasped and nearly dropped the mug. Kieran pulled his hand back instantly. "Sorry. Static." It wasn't static. Galatea knew it wasn't static. Her inner wolf, usually so quiet, was currently clawing at her chest, purring. Mate. 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 She froze. No, it was impossible. She was a defect, a blind omega. The moon goddess wouldn't pair her with anyone, let alone a man with a voice that commanded the very air around him. She took a sip of the liquid. It was hot chocolate, rich and sweet. "Why did you save me? I don't like seeing things go to waste," Kieran said, his voice void of emotion, though the scent of him betrayed a spike of protectiveness. "And you were making a lot of noise, stumbling around my territory." "I was exiled," she blurted out, needing him to know she had nothing to offer. "From Shadow Ridge. I have nothing to pay you with. I'm blind. I can't." "I didn't ask for payment, Galatea." The way he said her name made her shiver. "Drink, then sleep. You have frostbite on your toes that I need to tend to later. You're a doctor. I know how to heal." He walked back to the chair. She heard the rustle of paper. "Rest. The storm is going to last for 3 more days. You aren't going anywhere." Galatea lay back down, clutching the mug. She strained her ears, trying to build a picture of him. He was big. The floorboards groaned under him. He was patient, and he was hiding something. Kieran Donovan watched the girl sleep from across the room. The firelight danced on her pale skin, highlighting the bruises under her eyes. He gripped the arm of his chair until the wood splintered. He knew exactly who she was. Galatea Mercer, the blind girl from the Shadow Ridge pack. He also knew exactly what she was to him. The moment he had found her in the snow, his wolf Fenrir had gone absolutely feral. Mine. The beast had roared. Mate. Queen. But Kieran couldn't claim her. Not yet. Not ever, perhaps. He looked at his reflection in the darkened window pane. He saw the scars that ran down the left side of his face, the milky white of his own damaged eye, the result of the war that had made him king. They called him the Butcher of the North, the Alpha King who slaughtered his own council to take the throne. He was a monster in the stories mothers told their children. If this fragile, broken bird of a girl knew she was sleeping in the lair of the Alpha King, she would die of fright. He had to let her go. He would heal her, feed her, and when the storm broke, he would send her to a safe pack in the south with enough money to live comfortably. He couldn't be her mate. He was death. She was life. But as she shifted in her sleep and murmured a soft sound, Kieran felt his resolve cracking. He stood up and walked silently to the bedside. He reached out his hand, hovering over her hair, trembling. "I won't let them hurt you again," he whispered, a vow sealed in blood. "I will burn Shadow Ridge to the ground for what they did to you." He pulled his hand back before he touched her. If he touched her, he wouldn't be able to stop. Outside, the blizzard raged on, sealing them in together. The storm raged for 2 more days, sealing the cabin in a cocoon of white silence. For Galatea, however, it was the warmest winter of her life. Kieran was a man of few words, but his actions spoke a language she was quickly learning to translate. The heavy wool blankets tucked around her shoulders meant stay warm. The way he placed the mug of stew exactly 3 inches from her right hand every time meant, "I am watching out for you." The low rumble of his hum when he sat by the fire meant, "I am content." Galatea sat on the plush rug before the hearth, her fingers idly tracing the intricate carvings on the leg of the coffee table. Her blindness had always been a cage at Shadow Ridge, a reason for ridicule. Here in the small cabin with the mysterious man, it felt less like a disability and more like a different way of seeing. "You're staring at me again," Galatea said softly, a small smile playing on her lips. From the armchair, the sound of a page turning stopped. "How do you know?" Kieran's voice was rough, like gravel crunching under tires. "The air changes," she explained, turning her face toward where she knew he sat. "It feels heavier when you look at me. Intense. I'm just making sure you don't trip into the fire." He grunted, though the scent of his embarrassment, burnt sugar and musk wafted toward her. "Kieran. What do you look like?" The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. She heard him shift the leather of the chair, groaning under his massive frame. "I look like a nightmare Galatea," he said finally. "I have scars. I am missing an eye. My face, it scares people. Grown men cross the street to avoid me." "I'm not scared of you," she said, standing up. She navigated the few steps between them with the mental map she had created. She reached out her hand, hovering in the air. "Let me see." "No." He snapped the rejection sharp. "You don't want to touch me." "I do," she insisted, her voice trembling but firm. "You saved my life. You fed me. You healed my frostbite. I don't care about scars. Please." Kieran didn't move. He sat frozen, his breath hitching in his chest. He was the Alpha King. He commanded armies. He had executed traitors with his bare hands. Yet this tiny, broken girl terrified him. If she felt the ruin of his face, the map of his violent history, she would recoil. He couldn't bear that. But he couldn't deny her either. Slowly he leaned forward. He took her wrist, his hand engulfing hers entirely, and guided her fingers to his jaw. "Don't say I didn't warn you," he whispered. Galatea's fingertips were cool against his burning skin. She traced the strong, square line of his jaw, feeling the prickle of stubble. Then she moved up. Her fingers found the jagged, raised ridge of flesh that started at his hairline, slashed through his left eyebrow, and destroyed the skin around his left eye socket, before trailing down to his lip. It was a brutal wound, the kind of wound that came from war. She traced the scar with a reverence that made Kieran's heart thunder against his ribs. She didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. Her thumb brushed over his good eye, which fluttered shut at her touch, and then over the patch that covered his lost one. "You must have been in so much pain," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "I'm so sorry." Kieran stopped breathing. She didn't see a monster. She saw pain. "It was a long time ago," he rasped, his voice breaking. "You have a kind face," she concluded, her hands cupping his cheeks. Kieran let out a shuddering breath and leaned his forehead against her stomach as she stood before him. For a moment, the Alpha King was on his knees, surrendering to the Omega, who couldn't see his crown, only his soul. Meanwhile, miles away at the Shadow Ridge packhouse, the atmosphere was far less tender. Alpha Garrick paced his office, sweeping a stack of papers off his desk in a fit of rage. They scattered across the floor like dead leaves. "What do you mean she's gone?" The voice on the speakerphone was smooth, oily, and dangerous. It belonged to Alpha Valerius of the Obsidian Lake Pack, a man known for his wealth and his sadism. "I told you, Valerius," Garrick stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. We exiled her. She was useless, a blind mouth to feed." "You idiot," Valerius hissed. I didn't want her for her eyes. I wanted her bloodline. Did you never check her registry? Her mother was a seer from the Silver Moon line. The blindness isn't a defect. It's a trait of high-level intuitive omegas. Their pups are born with alpha dominance, guaranteed. Garrick went pale. He had thrown out a gold mine. Valerius had offered a treaty food weapons protection in exchange for an unblemished omega breeder. "Find her," Valerius commanded. "If she's dead, bring me her head, so I know you aren't lying. If she's alive, bring her to me, unharmed, or I will wipe Shadow Ridge off the map." The line went dead. Garrick slammed his fist into the wall. He turned to Brant, who was cowering by the door. "Get the trackers. Get the snowmobiles. I don't care about the blizzard. Find the girl, and if anyone gets in your way, kill them." The blizzard broke on the fourth morning. The sun emerged blindingly bright against the fresh white blanket that covered the world. Kieran stood on the porch of the cabin, adjusting the axe on his belt. The air was crisp, but the wind carried a scent that made his hackles rise. Diesel and wolfsbane. "I need to check the perimeter," Kieran called out to Galatea, who was washing dishes in the kitchen. "Stay inside, lock the door. Do not open it for anyone." "Is something wrong?" Her voice wavered. "Just precautions. Bears wake up hungry after a storm." It was a lie. There were no bears. There were men. He stepped off the porch and shifted. His clothes shredded as the massive white wolf Fenrir burst forth. He stood nearly 5 feet at the shoulder, a prehistoric beast of muscle and fang. He didn't howl. He hunted in silence. Inside the cabin, Galatea dried a plate, her heart pounding. Kieran had been tense all morning. She moved to the living room and sat on the sofa. Her hand brushed against a heavy coat draped over the back. She pulled it into her lap for comfort. Her fingers ran over the buttons. They weren't plastic. They were metal, heavy and cold, embossed with a raised design. She traced the shape. A wolf's head. And above it, a crown. She frowned. Why would a rogue living in the woods have a coat with a royal crest crash? The front window shattered inward. Galatea screamed, scrambling backward as heavy boots crunched on the glass. The freezing air rushed in, accompanied by the smell of unwashed bodies and gasoline. "Well, well," a sneering voice said. "Look what we found, the little lost sheep." Galatea recognized the voice. It was Roderick, one of Garrick's best trackers, a man who enjoyed hurting things. "Roderick?" She gasped, backing up until she hit the fireplace. "What are you doing here? Alpha wants you back. Gala!" Roderick laughed, stepping closer. "Turns out you're worth something after all. Who knew the blind girl was a golden goose?" "Get out!" she yelled, grabbing the iron poker from the fireplace. She swung it blindly. Roderick caught it easily, wrenching it from her grip. He grabbed her hair, yanking her head back. "None of that. We're going for a ride. And if you're good, maybe I won't let the boys have a turn with you before we get to Valerius." Galatea screamed a raw, terrified sound that ripped through the air. Outside, a mile away, the white wolf froze. The sound of his mate's scream hit him like a physical blow. Fenrir didn't just run. He teleported. The ancient magic of the Alpha King. The ability to move through shadows flared to life. Roderick was dragging Galatea toward the broken window when the front door didn't just open, it exploded. Splinters of oak flew like shrapnel. Roderick spun around, shielding his face. Standing in the doorway was not a wolf, but a man. Kieran was naked from the shift steam rising from his skin, his body painted in the violence of his rage. His one good eye was glowing a luminous, terrifying gold. The scar on his face looked like a rift in the earth. "Let her go!" The voice wasn't human. It was the command. It hit Roderick with the force of a sledgehammer. The tracker's knees buckled, forced down by the sheer weight of the authority in that voice. He released Galatea instantly, gasping for air, clutching his chest. "Alpha? Alpha command!" Roderick choked out his eyes, bulging. You're an Alpha?" Kieran didn't answer. He walked into the room. The floorboards didn't creak. They seemed to solidify under his power. Galatea was huddled on the floor, shaking. "Kieran, close your ears, Galatea," Kieran said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Who are you?" Roderick scrambled backward, wetting himself. "No rogue has that power. Who are you?" Kieran stopped over the tracker. He looked down like a ghoul, looking at an insect. "I am the one who owns the North," Kieran said. "And you touched my queen." Roderick's eyes went full with recognition. "The Butcher. You're the king. Kieran's hand moved faster than sight. He grabbed Roderick by the throat and lifted him one-handed into the air. "Goodbye," Kieran whispered. There was a sickening crack, and Roderick went limp. Kieran tossed the body aside like a rag doll. Silence descended on the cabin, heavy and suffocating. Galatea sat amidst the glass, her chest heaving. She had heard it all. The command. The name, Butcher. The word, Queen. Kieran stood there, his chest heaving, the gold fading from his eye. He realized what he had done. He had revealed the monster. He turned to look at her, waiting for the scream, waiting for her to run. "Galatea," he started, his voice rough with shame. "You're the Alpha King," she whispered. Her face turned toward him. She didn't look scared. She looked betrayed. "You're Kieran Donovan, the king who killed his own family." "They were traitors," he said, the old defense rising automatically. "But yes, I am him." "You lied to me. I omitted the truth to protect you." He took a step toward her. "If you knew who I was, you would have run into the snow and died." "I'm not afraid of your title," she cried, standing up, glass crunching under her boots. "I am afraid because you are the most powerful man in the world, and I am a discard from Shadow Ridge. Why? Why play house with me?" "Play house!" Kieran roared, the hurt slicing through him. He closed the distance between them, grabbing her shoulders. "You think this is a game? My wolf has been screaming that you are mine since the moment you fell in the snow." Galatea froze. "What? You are my mate, Galatea," Kieran growled, shaking her slightly. "I didn't tell you because I am a monster. I am the Butcher. I didn't want to saddle you with a mate who is broken and feared by the entire world. I wanted to heal you and set you free." The confession hung in the air. Galatea's hands came up, finding his chest. She felt the frantic, thunderous beating of his heart. It was beating for her. "You weren't going to keep me?" she asked, her voice small. "I didn't think I deserved to keep you." He admitted, his voice dropping to a whisper. Galatea stepped closer, wrapping her arms around his waist, pressing her face against his bare chest. "You stupid, stupid wolf. You don't get to decide what I deserve." Kieran wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her neck, inhaling her scent, lavender and fear and hope. "They know you are here now," Kieran murmured into her hair. "Roderick wasn't alone. There will be others. Shadow Ridge is coming." "Let them come," Galatea said, pulling back to face him, her blind eyes fierce. "I have the Alpha King." Kieran looked at the dead body of the tracker, then back at his mate. A dark, possessive grin spread across his scarred face. "No," he corrected her. "They aren't coming for you anymore. We are going to them. It's time I paid Alpha Garrick a visit." The journey back to Shadow Ridge was a stark contrast to Galatea's exile. Where she had stumbled alone into a wall of freezing death, she now rode in the passenger seat of a roaring armored SUV that Kieran had pulled from a hidden garage beneath the cabin. The heater blasted warmth, and the hand of the Alpha King rested possessively on her thigh. Kieran had made a call on a satellite phone during the drive. He didn't speak in sentences. He spoke in coordinates and attack orders. He was mobilizing the Royal Guard, his elite enforcers. They would meet them at the target. "Are you nervous?" Kieran asked, his voice low, his eyes scanning the snowy road ahead with predatory focus. "No," Galatea said, surprised to find it was the truth. She smelled the leather of the seats, the faint metallic scent of the gun tucked into Kieran's waistband, and the overwhelming aroma of him, power, cedarwood, and absolute certainty. "I feel ready. They threw away a piece of trash. I want them to see what you polished it into." Kieran's hand tightened on her leg. "They will see a queen, and they will bleed for not seeing it sooner." They arrived at the border of the Shadow Ridge territory, just as dusk was bleeding into night. The pack house was lit up. Tension was palpable in the air even from a distance. Roderick's failure to report in had clearly caused panic. 2 guards stood at the main gate. As Kieran's vehicle approached, they stepped out, shifting their rifles. Kieran didn't slow down. He didn't even blink. He accelerated. The heavy grille of the SUV smashed through the reinforced wooden gate like it was made of matchsticks. The guards dived out of the way, shouting alarms. Kieran skidded the vehicle to a halt on the snow-covered lawn in front of the main house. Before the engine died, he was out of the door. "Stay in the car until I say otherwise," he commanded Galatea. A dozen shifters poured out of the pack house, led by a sweating, pale Alpha Garrick. Brant and Livia were close behind him. They carried shotguns and bats, crude weapons against what was standing on their lawn. Kieran stood alone in the snow. He didn't shift. He didn't need to. He just let his aura go. The pressure hit the Shadow Ridge wolves like a physical wave. It was the Alpha command of the King, magnified by a decade of suppressed rage. The weaker wolves instantly dropped to their knees, whining, unable to meet his gaze. Garrick struggled to remain standing, his knees shaking violently. Who are you to invade my lands?" Kieran walked forward slowly. Every step was a hammer blow on the frozen ground. "I am the consequence of your stupidity, Garrick," Kieran said, his voice eerily calm, carrying across the silent clearing. "I am the butcher of the North, and I have come to collect a debt." Garrick's eyes almost popped out of his head. "Your Majesty, we didn't know." "What debt?" "We have paid our taxes to the Crown." The front door of the pack house opened again. A tall, elegant man in an expensive wool coat stepped out, flanked by 2 enormous bodyguards. The scent of expensive cologne and rot hit the air. Alpha Valerius of Obsidian Lake. "Well, well," Valerius drawled, looking annoyed rather than frightened. "The recluse king comes down from his mountain. You're interrupting a business transaction, Donovan." "There is no business here, Valerius," Kieran said, turning his scarred face toward the southern Alpha. "Only execution." "You're being dramatic," Valeria scoffed. "Garrick here lost a valuable piece of property in the snow, a blind Omega with seer blood. I came to help him retrieve it." "Perhaps you've seen her," Kieran laughed. It was a terrifying sound, devoid of humor. "Property? Is that what you call her?" He turned back toward the SUV. "Galatea, come here." The passenger door opened. Galatea stepped out into the cold night air. She wore Kieran's heavy coat, which swallowed her small frame. But she didn't look small. She held her head high, her blind eyes fixed straight ahead, guided by the sound of Kieran's breathing. A gasp went through the Shadow Ridge wolves. "It's the ghost," someone whispered. Livia looked like she had seen a phantom. How she should be frozen solid. Galatea walked until she stood next to Kieran. He immediately wrapped a massive arm around her shoulders, pulling her into his side. The gesture was unmistakable. It was a claim. "You threw her out to die because she couldn't see," Kieran spat at Garrick, his voice rising to a roar that shook snow from the trees. "You saw a defect. I saw perfection. You saw a burden. I saw my queen." Garrick fell to his knees, realization crashing down on him. He hadn't just exiled an Omega. He had exiled the mate of the Alpha King. Valerius, however, looked delighted. "The butcher found a mate, and it's the seer marvelous. That makes her doubly valuable." Valerius snapped his fingers. His two bodyguards, massive brutes doped up on stimulants, lunged toward Kieran and Galatea. "Take her," Valerius ordered. "Kill him." Kieran shoved Galatea behind him. "Close your eyes, little one." She didn't need to close her eyes to miss the violence. She heard it. The sickening crunch of bone, the wet tear of flesh. Kieran didn't shift into Fenrir. He fought as a man moving with impossible speed, a whirlwind of calculated brutality. He didn't just stop the bodyguards. He dismantled them. It took less than 10 seconds. When the silence returned, only Kieran was standing. His hands were coated in crimson. He turned his single gold eye toward Valerius. The smooth Alpha was no longer smiling. He had pulled a silver-plated handgun from his coat. "Don't take another step, Donovan," Valerius warned, his voice wavering. "I'll put a bullet in her brain before you can reach me." He aimed the gun past Kieran, straight at Galatea. Kieran froze. The beast inside him roared in frustration, but the man knew he couldn't outrun a bullet aimed at his heart. "Put it down, Valerius." Kieran growled, his voice thick with the verge of a shift. "And I'll let you die quickly." "I think not," Valerius sneered. "Galatea, come to me, slowly, or I shoot your beast of a mate." Galatea stepped out from behind Kieran. "No," Kieran snarled. "It's okay," she whispered. She walked slowly toward Valerius, her hands raised. She smelled the acrid gunpowder, the sweat of Valerius's fear. "Smart girl." Valerius grinned, lowering his aim slightly as she approached. "You'll breed fine pups for my stock." He reached out to grab her arm. Galatea didn't need sight. She had spent 12 years navigating a world that didn't want her. She knew exactly where he was by the sound of his shallow breathing and the scuff of his expensive shoes on the ice. As his hand closed on her forearm, she moved. Not away, but in. She dropped her weight, driving the heel of her boot straight down onto his instep, with all the force she possessed. At the same time, she jammed her thumb hard into the soft pressure point beneath his jaw, a trick old Martha the cook had taught her for dealing with drunken hands. Valerius shrieked in surprise and pain, his reflex forcing him to jerk backward. The gun fired the shot going wild into the night sky. That split second of distraction was all Kieran needed. He was on Valerius before the echo of the gunshot faded. He didn't punch him. He grabbed Valerius by the face, his massive hand covering the man's nose and mouth, silencing his screams. Kieran lifted him off the ground and slammed him into the side of the pack house with enough force to crack the foundation logs. Then with a sickening twist, Kieran ended the threat of Obsidian Lake. He dropped the body and immediately turned turned to Galatea, his hands frantic as he checked her for injuries. "Did he touch you? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine." She was breathing hard, adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I got him." "Did you see? I got him." Kieran let out a shaky breath and pulled her against his blood-stained chest, burying his face in her neck. "You are magnificent," he whispered fiercely. "You are terrifying." He turned to look at the remaining wolves of Shadow Ridge. They were huddled together, terrified, waiting for judgment. Garrick was still on his knees, weeping silently. Kieran stepped forward, his voice the cold gavel of fate. "Garrick of Shadow Ridge, by Alpha law, you are unfit. You are stripped of your rank. You and your immediate family." He glared at a cowering Livia and Brant, "are exiled. You have 1 hour to leave these lands. If I find you after that, I will not be merciful." He looked at the rest of the pack, the bystanders, who had watched Galatea suffer for years and done nothing. "This pack is dissolved," Kieran declared. "Those of you who are useful, who have good hearts buried under this filth, may petition to join the Royal Guard support staff. The rest of you, run." He turned his back on them, dismissed them entirely. He walked to Galatea, scooping her up into his arms, bridal style. She squeaked in surprise, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Home," the Alpha King replied, carrying his blind queen away from the place of her torment and toward the future they would build together. "We are going home." 3 months had passed since the snows of the north were stained red, and the royal palace in the capital city was a far cry from the drafty attic of Shadow Ridge or the isolated cabin in the woods. It was a place of echoing stone, polished glass, and the heavy ancient scent of power beeswax old paper, and the underlying current of 1,000 wolves moving in unison. Galatea sat on a private balcony overlooking the royal gardens. The spring air was sweet, carrying the heavy perfume of blooming jasmine and damp, fertile earth. To a sighted person, the view was likely breathtaking, a riot of color and manicured hedges. To Galatea, it was a symphony of sensation. She could hear the distant rhythmic marching of the changing guard at the outer gates, the low hum of the city beyond the walls, and the nearer melodic bubbling of a marble fountain 3 stories down. She took a sip of her tea, the porcelain delicate and warm against her fingers. Life had changed with a velocity that sometimes made her dizzy. Kieran hadn't just brought her home. He had enthroned her. The coronation had been small per her request, but the message sent to the werewolf world was deafening. The butcher had a heart, and it belonged to the blind Omega he now called Queen. There had been whispers, of course. Prejudice was a weed with deep roots, and it didn't die overnight. When she first arrived, the court was rife with murmurs. How can a blind woman rule? Is she weak? Is she a charity case? Galatea silenced them, not with speeches, but with action. She didn't need eyes to see the truth. In fact, her lack of sight made her impossible to deceive. She thought back to the council meeting 2 days ago. An ambassador from the Southern Territories had come to negotiate a trade treaty. He had smiled with his teeth, his voice dripping with honeyed reassurances about border security. But Galatea had sat at the head of the table, her head tilted slightly, listening to the rhythm of his heart. She heard the skipped beat when he mentioned the troop numbers. She smelled the spike of cortisol, the sharp metallic tang of fear when he claimed the southern passes were clear. She had placed a hand on Kieran's forearm, stopping him from signing. "He is lying about the troops," she had said softly, her voice carrying through the silent room. "And he is afraid of something following him from the south." The ambassador had crumbled. Now Galatea was Kieran's truth-sayer. The seer blood that Valerius had coveted wasn't some mystical ability to predict the future. It was a hyper-awareness born of survival, honed in the dark, and now wielded as a weapon for the crown. The heavy, distinct sound of boots on stone broke her reverie. Galatea smiled before the glass door even opened. She knew that stride, heavy, deliberate, yet carrying a leashed power that commanded the very air to part around it. "You're out of the council meeting early," she noted, turning her face toward the sound as the door slid open. Kieran stepped onto the balcony, bringing with him a change in the atmosphere. The air felt charged warmer. The tension that used to be his constant companion, tightening his muscles like steel cables, had lessened over the months. His scent was cleaner now, less ozone, and violence more just deep cedarwood musk and a profound, settling contentment. "I got bored." Kieran admitted his voice, a low rumble that vibrated in her chest. He moved to stand behind her chair, his large, warm hands coming to rest on her shoulders. They were arguing about grain tariffs again. The Minister of Agriculture loves the sound of his own voice. I decided I'd rather look at my wife. Galatea reached up, placing her hand over his on her shoulder. She felt the rough calluses of his warrior past, the skin hardened by years of gripping weapons. It was a tactile map. She loved a history she accepted. "You mean you'd rather look at your wife, or make sure she hasn't fallen off the balcony?" She teased gently, tilting her head back to find his presence. Kieran chuckled, the sound deep and genuine. He leaned down, pressing a lingering kiss to the top of her head. "A little bit of both. Old habits die hard, little one." He moved around the chair, the rustle of his clothes the only sound, and then the air shifted as he lowered himself. The Alpha King. The man who made entire armies tremble, knelt on the stone floor before her. He took her hands in his thumbs tracing the delicate bones of her wrists. "Are you happy, Gala?" he asked. His tone had shifted, shedding the playfulness for a raw, vulnerable seriousness. "It's a lot. The palace, the politics, the people staring. I know you feel them staring." "I can't see them remember," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "But you feel them," he insisted. "I smell the anxiety on you sometimes. I took you from a hellhole, but I threw you into a snake pit." Galatea freed one hand and reached out. Her fingers found the strong line of his jaw, bristling slightly with afternoon stubble. She moved her hand up, tracing the scar tissue on his cheek, the jagged ridge that had defined his existence for so long. "For 12 years I was invisible," she said softly, her voice steady. "Or worse, I was something to be looked away from. A mistake. A burden to be managed until I could be discarded. You were the first person who really saw me, Kieran. Even when you were trying to push me away in that cabin, terrified of your own reflection, you saw me." She leaned forward, her forehead resting against his. She could feel the heat radiating from him, a furnace that kept the cold of the world at bay. "I have warmth. I have food that I don't have to beg for. I have respect. Real respect, not pity. And I have the love of the most terrifying man on the planet, who turns into a giant teddy bear the moment the door closes. She brushed her thumb over his closed eyelid. Yes, Kieran Donovan. I am happy. This is more than I ever dreamed of in the dark. Kieran let out a shuddering breath, turning his face into her palm and kissing the center of her hand. It was a gesture of absolute devotion, a silent vow renewed. You saved me, Galatea, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I was drowning in my own violence, convinced I was irredeemable. I thought I was just a weapon to be pointed at enemies. You pulled me out of the snow just as much as I pulled you. He stood up, pulling her gently to her feet. He didn't let go of her hand, tucking it securely into the crook of his arm. He led her to the stone railing of the balcony. Below them, the capital city was alive. Galatea could feel the vibration of it, the life, the commerce, the families living under the protection of the White Wolf. It was a heavy responsibility, but for the first time in her life, the weight didn't feel like it was crushing her. It felt like an anchor grounding her. The world is still a hard place, Kieran said, looking out over his domain. His voice had regained that steely edge of the king, but his hand on hers remained gentle. There are still wolves like Garrick and Valerius out there. There are still people who will underestimate us, who will try to take what we have built. Galatea tightened her grip on his arm. She didn't shrink away from the thought. The fear that had once paralyzed her at Shadow Ridge was gone, burned away by the fire of the White Wolf's love. Then we will face them, she said, firmly. Lifting her chin toward the horizon she could not see, but could perfectly perceive. Let them come. We will face them together. You with your eyes, and me with everything else. The Alpha King looked down at his blind queen. He saw the strength in the set of her jaw, the intelligence shining behind her unseeing eyes, and the unwavering loyalty that beat in her heart. He knew with absolute certainty that the strongest thing he had ever done wasn't killing his enemies, conquering the North, or seizing a throne of blood and ice. It was following a whim during a blinding blizzard to save a lost girl, and having the sense to let her save him right back. And that is the story of Galatea and Kieran, from a frozen exile in the woods to the throne of the werewolf kingdom. They proved that true power isn't about sight or brute strength. It's about seeing the worth in others that the rest of the world ignores. I really hope you enjoyed this epic emotional journey of the blind Omega and her Alpha King. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a big thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss the next thrilling romance drama. And hey, leave a comment down below. Do you think Kieran should have punished the rest of the Shadow Ridge pack more severely, or was dissolving the pack the right move? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.